Welcome to the History and Heritage podcast with me, Liam Blake. Join me as we uncover hidden stories and insights that shaped our world. From mysteries to legacies, join us on this journey through time. Welcome to this special extended episode of the History and Heritage podcast. Today we're diving deep into the story of Ireland's native cattle, told in 4 parts, each one exploring a different breed: the Kerry cow, also known as the Kerry, the Droimeann, the Dexter, and the Irish Moiled. Let's start with the Kerry cow. The Kerry cow, found chiefly in the southwestern parts of Ireland, is believed to be of very ancient origin. It is one of the few truly native breeds left in Europe. And that was a quote by H.D. Richardson in his book The Natural History of the Ox, Sheep, Goat and Horse from 1847. If you close your eyes and picture the southwest of Ireland, where the mountains press down into the valleys and the wind sings across craggy uplands, you'll find a landscape shaped as much by cattle as by men, and none more so than the small, coal-black, bright-eyed breed known as the Kerry cow. To understand the Kerry, you must travel not just through Irish geography, but through time itself. This is not just a relic of bygone agricultural system. It's a living fossil, a rare survivor of the earliest Neolithic cattle brought to Ireland some 4,000 years ago. Genetic studies conducted by Trinity College Dublin in recent years have confirmed what older Irish farmers long suspected: that the Kerry is among the oldest dairy breeds in Europe. In fact, it bears a direct genetic link to the ancient so-called Celtic Shorthorn, which arrived with some of Ireland's first agriculturalists. And so, from the very dawn of Irish settlement, these cattle have been part of our story. By the early medieval period, Kerry cattle were no longer just animals. They were units of currency, measures of honour, and even legal instruments. In the early Brehon laws of the Celts, a man's wealth was counted in cows. If he was wronged, his compensation was measured in heifers. A noble's standing could be described not in land, but in milk-producing stock, and no breed was more prized for its milk than the Kerry. These cows were built for resilience. Small-framed and hardy, they were ideally suited to the lean pasture of southwest Ireland. In counties Kerry and Cork, where rough hills and acid soils made wheat growing nearly impossible, it was this cow that sustained the people. The Kerry thrived where others failed, grazing on heather, sea salt marsh, or grubby grass, and producing milk with exceptional butterfat content even under the harshest of conditions. By the 18th century, visitors to Ireland were remarking on this peculiar black cow with her upturned horns and proud gait. Arthur Young, in his Tour in Ireland, 1776 to 1779, wrote of seeing herds of small and handsome cattle around Killarney and Tralee, noting that their milk was uncommonly rich. But even then, there was a sense that this was a breed under threat. From the creeping influence of the English agricultural fashion, and from the crossbreeding practices that followed the spread of estate-driven improvement, which is a feature that you will hear throughout this episode. Still, the Kerry endured, because it had to. In the 19th century, during the Great Famine, it was often Kerry cows that sustained the small tenant families, not just through milk, but as barter. A cow might be sold to pay rent or kept in defiance of it, and in the years that followed, many of the 19th century land reformers who supported peasant ownership of land, including Michael Davitt and the Land League, saw cattle ownership, and particularly dairy cattle, as a key to rural independence. But it wasn't just cultural survival. The Kerry cow began to attract scientific interest. In 1830, the Irish Farmers and Gardeners magazine began to carry reports of the breed's unique traits. its disease resistance, early maturity, and productivity. By the 1860s, the Royal Dublin Society was sponsoring shows specifically for Kerry cattle, and the first breed societies began to form. In 1887, the Kerry Cattle Society was formally founded, and in 1891, the first volume of the Kerry and Dexter herd book, which we will come across later, was published, a pivotal document that remains in use today. It was around this time that something interesting happened. A subset of smaller Kerry cows, shorter-legged, rounder-bodied, began to be bred separately. These became the Dexter breed, which we'll explore in depth later in this episode. But for now, it's important to note, both the Kerry and Dexter descend from the same ancient stock, and the decision to split them formally was born out of evolving needs, economic and aesthetic more than biological. As the 20th century dawned, the Kerry cow seemed poised for international recognition. Herds were exported to Britain, the United States, Australia, and even as far as New Zealand. There, they were praised for their ease of calving, their ability to produce under marginal conditions, and their long lifespans. Unlike some modern-day breeds, which may give high yields for just a few years, the Kerry was known to produce well into her teens, and yet, for all their strength, the Kerry nearly disappeared. By the 1970s, agricultural policy in Ireland had become fixated on yield. More litres, more weight, more export. Holstein Friesians came to dominate the dairy scene. Subsidies favoured larger breeds, and small native herds began to dwindle. In 1983, a census by the Department of Agriculture found just 210 registered Kerry cows left in Ireland. The alarm was sounded. Conservationists, heritage breeders, and agricultural historians joined forces to save the breed, which is a theme you will hear throughout this episode. With support from the Irish government, Teagasc, and the FAO, genetic material was frozen and structured breeding programs put in place. In 1991, the Kerry Cattle Society was reformed with renewed purpose. In 1999, the Dunsany Declaration was signed, committing state and private institutions to the breed's long-term survival. But perhaps the most meaningful support came not from institutions, but from ordinary Irish farmers. Men and women, many of them in West Kerry and North Cork, began to hold onto their old lines, to resist crossbreeding, to remember, and to teach. One such farmer was Tomás O'Sullivan of Glenbeigh, who once told an interviewer from D.G. Cahir that his Kerry cows were, and I quote, the heartbeat of the land. He could name the dam and sire of every cow in his herd back 5 generations. They've been with us longer than the house, he said, and longer than the walls. And there is something poetic in that, because when you look at a Kerry cow, not just her physical appearance, but her symbolic one, you are seeing Ireland in miniature. Resilient, underestimated, gentle in appearance, but with an unyielding core. The Kerry has endured not through scale or subsidy, but through memory, through people who saw in her not just a yield, but a legacy. Today, there are still only around 1,000 registered Kerry cattle in the entire world, most of them in Ireland. They remain an endangered breed, classified as at risk by the Irish Department of Agriculture. But they are also thriving in their own way. Small creameries in Kerry and Cork now make boutique butter and cheese exclusively from Kerry milk, products with a terroir and a story. Heritage farms use Kerry cows in public education, and young farmers, encouraged by subsidy programs and the pride of place, are returning to the breed. You can even find Kerry cows in the National Ploughing Championships, drawing crowds not for size or novelty, but for the sheer fact of their survival. People stop and stare. They ask questions, because deep down, we all recognise what's rare and what's worth saving. As the sun sets over the Black Valley, or as the fog lifts off Loch Lane, you might still hear the lowing of a Kerry cow, small, dark and deliberate. She's not a showpiece, She's not a curiosity. She is, as she has always been, a part of the Irish land itself. And after this short break, we'll continue our journey with another native Irish cow that nearly vanished, the Irish Moiled. Welcome back. Let's continue now with the story of the Irish Moiled, a breed as distinct as the land it comes from. A breed indigenous to Ireland, noted for its docile nature, rich colouring, and capacity to thrive in wet and hilly ground. That was a quote from the Royal Dublin Society catalogue of the Agricultural Division in 1896. If the Kerry cow is Ireland's quiet elder, black-coated, mountain-born and wise, then the Irish Moiled is her striking, more flamboyant cousin, white-bodied, red roan, and crowned with a ridge of soft curls that runs from brow to tail. Few breeds are as visually distinctive, and fewer still carry a story so deeply intertwined with the northern counties of this island. To trace the Moily, because that's what they call them, we must look to Ulster, and especially to the counties Down, Antrim and Derry, where the breed developed among smallholders working the Drumlin Hills, bogs and riverside pasture of that fertile yet often overlooked region. The word moil, sometimes spelt M-O-Y-L-E, is thought to come from the Irish moel, M-A-O-L, meaning bald or polled, a reference to the breed's naturally hornless condition. But the name doesn't quite capture the breed's elegance. A body cloaked in white, flecked with red roan across the shoulders and flanks, and a distinctive mahogany head, sometimes called a mulberry muzzle by fanciers. Unlike the Kerry, the Irish Moiled was not purely a dairy cow, nor purely a beef breed. It was a triple-purpose animal, actually. Milk, meat, and draught, adaptable to nearly any terrain, and well suited to the harsh economics of post-medieval Ireland. In the Protestant-owned farms of 17th and 18th century Ulster, where Catholic tenants were often required to farm steep, poor land with little access to large pasture or expensive fodder, a multi-purpose animal was essential. And the Moily, hard, fertile, and docile, was just that. Documentary references to the Moily go back as far as the late 1600s, though the breed is undoubtedly older. Local oral tradition in areas like Rathlin Island and the Glens of Antrim record herds of white cattle with red heads being driven down to the sea in the 1700s to graze on seaweed, which supplemented their mineral intake. The breed adapted beautifully to both lowland meadows and upland heath, and its milk, rich in butterfat and naturally homogenized, was treasured for butter and cheese production across Ulster. By the 19th century, the Irish Moiled had become the dominant breed in Ulster. Agricultural journals from the 1820s to the 1850s described them with admiration. The Belfast Newsletter in 1839 reported, "A great number of the fair cattle at the Downpatrick Mart were of the Moiled variety, and none of them fetched higher prices. Their beef is lean, but full of flavour, the cows milk heavily." But like so many native breeds, the Moily suffered at the hands of fashion. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the rise of shorthorns, heavier, more uniform and associated with British agricultural progress, pushed aside Ireland's more idiosyncratic native cattle. Crossbreeding became widespread, and the Moily's unique coloration began to fade from fields. And by the 1930s, the breed had begun a steep and nearly terminal decline. Yet some resisted. In 1926, a few progressive breeders in Rathfriland and Coleraine began gathering information on surviving lines. One of them, Samuel Chestnut, wrote to the Ulster Agricultural Journal warning of the impending loss. "We are in danger of losing our own, of seeing the last of the Moiled cow who has served this land more faithfully than many of the imported English stock, he said. That plea fell largely on deaf ears. By the 1970s, there were fewer than 40 breeding Irish Moiled cows remaining in all of Ireland. It was one of the rarest cattle breeds on the planet. The breed was kept alive only by a few die-hard families, particularly the McKeown and MacNeil families in County Down, who had kept Moilies out of stubbornness, not economics, as one descendant later put it. The turning point came in 1982, when a group of heritage farmers and breeders, including David Swanston, Dr. Morris Brick, and Henry Savage, founded the Irish Moiled Cattle Society. They began a painstaking search for surviving purebreds, combing through old records, show catalogues, and handwritten pedigree books. They even followed up on oral rumours. One farmer in Ballymena, for instance, was said to have a cow that looked like a Moilie. Sometimes it was true, often it wasn't. A genetic survey, completed in 1992 with assistance from the Rare Breed Survival Trust, confirmed that the core population still existed. Barely. A conservation breeding programme was launched, supported by the Irish Agricultural Authorities in Northern Ireland's Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. Today, the breed remains rare but recovering. Around 1,000 registered Irish Moileds now exist across Ireland, the UK, and even in small numbers in New Zealand and Canada. Their genetic diversity is fragile, but carefully stewarded. And what of their uses? The Moilie is no longer a draft animal, but as a grass-fed heritage beef breed, it has gained a loyal following among artisan producers and chefs. The meat is lean but marbled, fine-grained, and full of flavour. The cows still produce excellent milk, sometimes used for small batch butter or ice cream on family farms. Their docile temperament makes them ideal for agroecological grazing schemes, and they are prized on conservation farms for their ability to graze varied, sometimes awkward pastures. Yet their importance isn't merely economic or ecological. The Irish Moiled is a living monument to Northern Ireland's agricultural past, to the mixed economies of early modern Ireland, and to the quiet tenacity of the smallholder. Their comeback has been led not by corporations, but by families, cooperatives, and societies who value the living links they place. And if you visit the Ulster Folk Museum in County Down, you may spot them again, ambling through fields of rush and bog, their heads bobbing against the green. Not a relic, not a showpiece, just a working animal, doing what it has always done, thriving in Ireland. After this second break, we'll move westward, towards a breed that is small in stature, but vast in cultural memory. The Dexter. Thanks for sticking with me. Next up is the Dexter, a breed small in size, but big in Irish history. The smallest of all British breeds, but one of the most valuable in proportion to size. So that was a quote from the Agricultural Gazette of Ireland in 1904. At first glance, the Dexter doesn't look like a breed with a story to tell. Compact, often under 4 feet tall, with legs so short they earned the nickname the poor man's house cow, the Dexter has sometimes been mistaken for a novelty or a curiosity. But appearances can deceive, because behind this modest frame lies a long and layered history that reaches deep into the Irish landscape and into the very fabric of rural life. The origins of the Dexter are, like so many of Ireland's native animals, veiled in uncertainty but steeped in lore. What we do know is that by the early 18th century, a distinctive type of small black cattle was being kept in the mountainous parts of southwest Ireland, especially in Kerry and Tipperary, where poor soil and wet pastures made large stock impractical. They were hardy, sure-footed and undemanding, perfectly adapted to the rough, heather-strewn uplands that other breeds avoided. The name Dexter itself first appears around 1776, reportedly associated with a Mr. Dexter, land agent for Lord Warden of Tipperary, who selectively bred these smaller cows for their usefulness among tenant farmers. Whether Mr. Dexter formalised an already existing landrace or simply popularised a local variety remains unclear. What is certain is that by the early 1800s the name had stuck, and the Dexter was recognised as a distinct breed. What made the Dexter so valued wasn't just its size, it was its versatility. Like the Irish Moiled, the Dexter was a dual-purpose animal, offering rich milk and tender beef, all while requiring minimal inputs. The Dexter could thrive on rough grazing alone and still produce between 2.5 and 3.5 gallons of milk a day, with butterfat content exceeding 4%. For a subsistence-level household, this was gold. The same cow, when retired from milking, could be fattened for the table. And its smaller carcass meant less waste in a time before refrigeration. Descriptions from the Royal Dublin Society and Irish Farmers' Gazette in the 19th century are glowing. Dexter cattle were praised for their longevity, calving ease, and gentle nature. But what truly stood out was their economy. In the age of rising rents, tithes, and emigration, the Dexter allowed Irish families to make ends meet. Many kept them tethered beside the cottage or housed them under the same thatched roof through the long damp winters, a practice known as booley cowkeeping. And here lies one of the most poignant intersections of breed and history, the Great Famine. During the famine of the 1840s, many of the smallholders lost not only their potato crop, but their means of animal husbandry. Those who managed to hold on to land often had no money for feed. It was in this grim context that the Dexter's hardiness proved life-saving. Able to survive on poor forage and native plants, many families relied on their house cow to keep the children fed. Oral histories from West Cork and North Kerry describe families boiling nettles, dandelions, and seaweed as fodder for their Dexters, who in turn gave milk that sustained the household. But the very traits that made the Dexter ideal for subsistence life also made it vulnerable in the age of agricultural modernization. As estate-driven agriculture expanded after 1850, I told you it would come up again, and with British tastes driving demand for heavier commercial breeds like the Shorthorn, the Dexter was increasingly seen as anachronistic. It was too small to meet new market standards. Crossbreeding eroded pure lines. By the end of the 19th century, concerns over the breed's survival were rising. Entered the Royal Dublin Society, who, in 1887, established a Dexter breed class at the annual spring show, helping to draw attention back to this native jewel. Even more significant was the establishment of the aforementioned Irish Kerry and Dexter cattle herd book in 1890, initially lumping the two breeds together due to their geographic overlap and visual similarities. For a time, they were seen almost as sisters, though the Dexter was usually shorter and squarer, while the Kerry was finer boned and more exclusively dairy. Throughout the early 20th century, Dexter cattle remained primarily an Irish concern, found mainly on the smaller farms of Munster and Connacht. However, after 1920, an odd twist of history occurred. Dexters gained popularity somewhat in England, particularly among aristocratic estates, where their small size made them perfect for ornamental park grazing and so-called ladies' dairies. Queen Victoria is reputed to have kept Dexters at Osborne House, and her daughter, Princess Beatrice, bred them in the Isle of Wight. In a curious inversion, the breed now had two parallel reputations: practical peasant cow in Ireland and fashionable hobby cow of the royal family in Britain. But even these twin sports weren't enough to prevent another decline. By the 1970s, the Dexter was listed by the Rare Breed Survival Trust as endangered, and pure lines in Ireland were critically low. Salvation again came from the grassroots. Enthusiasts in both Ireland and the UK who began cataloguing lineages, reviving interest through rare breed shows, and promoting the Dexter's value in an age of sustainability. Today, Dexter cattle number in the tens of thousands worldwide, with growing herds in North America, Australia, New Zealand, and even South Africa. Their small stature is now an advantage in a climate-conscious world. They cause less soil compaction, thrive on rough pasture, and produce lower methane emissions per kilo of beef than larger breeds. But beyond the statistics lies something deeper. The Dexter, more than any other Irish breed, represents resilience through modesty. It asks for little, it gives much, and it bears in its DNA the memory of families who endured hardship with dignity, of lands farmed by candlelight and muscle, and of a people who found a way to live with the land, not despite it. After the break, we'll meet the rarest and perhaps most mysterious of all of Ireland's native breeds, the Droimeann, a cow whose very existence was very nearly forgotten. Welcome back. In this final section, we explore a breed that nearly slipped from the memory altogether, the Droimeann. The Droimeann is a native breed that has adapted over centuries to the Irish landscape and way of life. It is part of our heritage. So that was a quote from Michael Creed, the Irish Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine, back in January 2020. In the hidden hills of West Limerick, along winding boreens and mossy hedgerows, there exists a cow whose very survival borders on the miraculous. For most of the 20th century, it was unnamed, unrecorded, and dismissed as a curious relic of bygone farming. Yet its presence persisted, lowing quietly in isolated fields, passed from father to son, farm to farm, and kept more from affection and instinct than any formal breeding strategy. This is the Droimeann, Ireland's newest old breed, and perhaps the most mysterious of them all. The name itself comes from the Irish word Droimeann, which comes from the Irish for fair-haired and back, referring to one of its most distinctive features, a contrasting dorsal stripe that runs along the spine, often a creamy white against darker flanks. Coat colours vary widely. It can be red, black, dun, white and brindle, but all true Droimeanns exhibit some form of that stripe, whether clearly or faintly. Their size is moderate, their horns upright and slightly swept, their temperament alert but calm. But what truly sets the Droimeann apart is its obscurity and its deep genetic roots. Unlike the more widely known Dexter or Kerry, the Droimeann wasn't formally recognised until that press release that I read from in 2020. Yet ancient references suggest its existence long before that. Early Irish literature, Brehon law texts, annals and folklore frequently mention Droimeann-type cattle, prized for their hardiness and adaptability. In some local traditions, they were considered spiritually significant. Cows of the Sheeda, or fairy cattle, sometimes appearing at crossroads or in legends involving transformation. During the medieval period, Ireland's cattle system was one of the most sophisticated in Europe. The value of a cow, its fertility, colour, yield and tractability, determined not just wealth, but social contracts, bride prices, and legal restitution. Among these herds, the Droimeann seems to have held a special place, neither aristocratic like the white cattle of legend, nor fully commonplace. They were, to borrow an old phrase, the cow of the scholar farmer, small, sturdy, clever, and loyal. Fast forward to the 19th century, and the Droimeann becomes harder to trace. Agricultural modernisation and breed standardisation swept across Ireland. Shorthorns were promoted by the Royal Dublin Society and, later, Holstein Friesians flooded the dairy market. Droimeann cattle, with their modest stature and multicoloured hides, were written off as crossbreeds or leftovers. But in pockets of the West, especially North Kerry, Clare and Limerick, Galway and Roscommon, they hung on. Farmers spoke of the old cow with reverence. She calved easily, gave rich milk, and never caused trouble. She never got sick, never got stuck, recalled one elderly farmer in Loughrea in a 1980s oral history. You wouldn't notice her until she was gone. By the 1990s, the breed was on the edge of extinction. Yet a quiet revival had begun, led not by government or industry, but by a handful of determined farmers, folklorists, and rural vets who believed that the cows were something special. Foremost among them was a man by the name of John Joe Fitzgerald of Lochiel, County Limerick, who began keeping meticulous records of his small herd, noting traits passed down through generations. He and others collaborated with Teagasc and the Department of Agriculture, and in 2014, a formal Droimeann Cattle Breeders' Society was founded. Hair samples and genetic profiles followed. DNA testing at Weatherby Scientific revealed what they had long suspected. The Droimeann was genetically distinct, not merely a crossbreed, but a coherent ancient strain. This was a seismic finding. After centuries of near-erasing, Ireland had recovered its own cow, a breed as native as the gorse and as enduring as the stone walls. In January 2020, as I said, the Department of Agriculture officially recognised the Droimeann as a native Irish rare breed, offering its protection under national conservation plans. It became only the fourth Irish cattle breed, alongside the Kerry, Dexter and Irish Moiled, which I have covered already, to receive such designation. But what makes the Droimeann more than a genetic footnote is what it can still do today. These cattle are astoundingly low maintenance. They thrive on sparse grazing, can calve well into old age, and have a strong immunity profile. Farmers report few hoof problems, less susceptibility to mastitis, and excellent conversion of roughage to milk and meat. In a world of input-heavy agriculture and climate anxiety, the Droimeann's frugal efficiency stands out as a model of sustainable livestock keeping. And yet, it's not just about the numbers. It's about connection, to the land, to the memory, and to the idea that what we nearly lost might be saved. Young farmers are taking an interest. School projects profile them, and at agricultural shows, once dominated by continental breeds, there's now a corner for the Droimeann, where old farmers lean on gates and say, I remember her, that's the one. She was the spit of what my father kept. As we conclude this journey through the lives and the legacies of the Kerry cow, the Irish Moiled, the Dexter and the Droimeann, we are reminded of one thing again and again. These breeds are not mere curiosities. They are living heritage, formed by centuries of interaction between people, place and animal. They are witnesses to famine, migration, survival and revival. Each breed tells its own story. If this episode has moved you, or sparked memories of animals your family once kept, I encourage you to share your story. You can reach me on Instagram at Atheline Blake Podcaster, or listen to the rest of the series via the History and Heritage podcast on Spotify and all major platforms. Ireland's native breeds are more than a collection of traits and pedigrees. They are a reminder the land remembers, and sometimes so do we.